My name is Aubrey Sinclair. I am 31 years old. Today I work as a graphic designer, a career that finally lets me hold on to the art I once thought I had lost forever. I live in a small apartment in a quiet city with my husband, and on the surface, my life looks calm, even happy. But beneath that calm, I carry scars that no one sees. Scars left by the family that raised me. Scars left by a sister who broke me in ways I never imagined. I tell this story now, not to relive the pain, but to finally let it breathe in the open, where silence can't strangle me anymore. And maybe, just maybe, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, you'll find pieces of yourself in my words. Betrayal. People often say it comes from strangers, but the deepest cut of my life did not come from someone far away. It came from my own sister. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been asked to swallow your pain so someone else could shine, then stay with me. Because my story begins long before the man I loved was stolen from me. It begins in the quiet corners of my childhood, where I learned that love in my house was never meant to be shared equally. I was 5 years old when my sister Celeste was born. She was tiny, premature, a fragile little thing the doctors weren't sure would make it through the night. When she did, everyone called her a miracle. And from that moment on, she became the center of every prayer, every plan, every smile my parents had left to give. My father Gregory and my mother Helen adored her. Not just in the way parents adore their children, but in a way that made her glow so brightly, the rest of us disappeared in her light. Or rather, I disappeared, because I was the older one, the one who was supposed to understand. When Celeste cried, I was told to hush so she could sleep. When she wanted my toy, I was told to share because she's been through so much. When she threw a tantrum, I was told to be patient, to be forgiving, to remember she was delicate. Every lesson I learned as a child was really the same command said over and over: sacrifice yourself for her. I remember being 6 years old, clutching my teddy bear while watching my parents rush to Celeste's crib at the slightest whimper. No one noticed I had a fever that night. I lay curled up in my bed, sweating and shivering while my mother rocked my sister in her arms just across the hall. The next morning, when my father finally saw me pale and quiet, he frowned and asked why I hadn't told anyone I was sick. I had told them, but their ears were tuned to only one voice, and it wasn't mine. The pattern never changed. At Christmas, when relatives asked about me, my parents quickly shifted the spotlight to Celeste's latest accomplishment: how she had survived, how brave she was, how remarkable. At school events, when I won a ribbon, they told people Celeste cheered her on as if my own hard work wasn't enough, without my sister's shadow attached to it. By the time I was 10, I had learned that my needs were secondary. If Celeste wanted the last cookie, it was hers. If she wanted the front seat, I climbed into the back without a word. I thought maybe, if I kept giving up little pieces of myself eventually, I'd earn a moment of recognition. But the moment never came. When I turned 12, I discovered art. Drawing and painting became the one place I could breathe the one thing that was mine alone. I begged my parents to let me join an art program at school. I can still remember the excitement bubbling in my chest when I showed them the flyer. But my mother smiled sadly and shook her head. "We don't have the money, sweetheart. Celeste needs speech therapy right now. Maybe another time." Another time never came. Each year brought new sacrifices. When I wanted to try out for the soccer team, I was told no, because practices conflicted with Celeste's piano lessons. When I wanted to go to a friend's birthday party, I was told I couldn't, because Celeste had a recital that we all need to support. I was always expected to be the supporting character in my own life. My role was clear: hold the camera, clap from the sidelines, smile for the pictures where I was barely in the frame. By the time I reached high school, the unfairness had stopped feeling like a mistake. It felt permanent. Like I was an afterthought in my own home. Teachers praised me, friends noticed me, but at the dinner table it was still only Celeste. Her grades, her activities, her boy, crushes, her struggles. I once brought home an award for top of my class. My father looked at it, nodded, then turned to Celeste and said, "Did you see what your sister did? Isn't she inspiring?" As if my achievement only mattered if it reflected back on her. The older I got, the deeper the wound cut. I began to envy not just the attention she received, but the tenderness. When Celeste failed, she was comforted. When I failed, I was scolded. When she cried, she was held. When I cried, I was told I was being dramatic. It taught me to swallow my emotions, to bury my tears, until no one could see them. There's one night I'll never forget. I was 15. I had spent weeks preparing for an art showcase at school. It was the first time my work was going to be displayed in front of judges and parents. I begged my mom to come, to please be there. She promised she would. But on the day of the showcase, Celeste sprained her ankle during gym class, and my mother rushed to the hospital with her instead. My father stayed home with Celeste afterward, and I stood in that crowded gymnasium surrounded by other kids' parents taking photos, cheering them on. And mine never came. I smiled for the judges anyway, but when I got home I cried into my pillow until I couldn't breathe. They never even asked me how it went. Little by little I learned to disappear, to pretend I didn't mind, to tell myself that being the strong one was noble. But inside I felt hollow, like I was made to be invisible. By the time I became an adult, the damage was already etched into me. I didn't believe I was worthy of attention. I didn't believe I was allowed to take up space. And I certainly didn't believe anyone would ever choose me first, because no one ever had. That's the soil where everything else in my life took root. The silence, the favoritism, the constant message that I was never enough. It shaped the choices I made, the men I trusted, the battles I avoided. And one day, it would cost me the man I loved. But in those early years, I didn't know how deep the damage would go. All I knew was that I was the daughter who was expected to endure, so my sister could shine. And the truth is, I thought I had already lost enough. I thought I had only lost my childhood. But I was wrong, because the same blindness that erased me as a daughter would one day steal the love of my life. I thought Rowan was different. From the very first moment we met, he treated me as if I mattered, not just as someone to pass the time with, but as someone worth listening to, worth holding space for. After years of feeling invisible that meant everything, for 2 years we built a rhythm that felt like stability. Dinners after work, weekend drives to nowhere, quiet mornings with coffee on the fire escape. We talked about a future, about a little house with crooked floors, about maybe getting a dog. For the first time in my life, I believed I was no one's second choice. I believed I was finally chosen. When my birthday came, I wanted him to meet my family. Maybe I thought if they saw the way Rowan looked at me, they'd finally see me too. He arrived with flowers so bright they lit up the kitchen. My mother fluttered over the vase, my father shook his hand, and I felt proud standing beside him. But then Celeste appeared. She walked into the room like she owned the air itself. Her hair curled, her dress chosen to draw at every glance. Her eyes locked on Rowan. And something in my chest tightened. It wasn't curiosity in her gaze. It was possession. She smiled at him the way she used to smile when she took my toys as a child. Not asking, not apologizing, just certain she had the right. All night she hovered. She asked Rowan question after question about his job, his plans, his favorite things, questions that should have been mine to answer. She laughed too loudly at his jokes. She leaned too close when she poured him wine. And when I caught her staring, she didn't look away. Her eyes said what her mouth never had to. If you value it, I will take it. After the party, the invitations began. She sent Rowan a message to thank him for coming, attaching a photo of the two of them when I had stepped out of the room. She asked him for help with errands she didn't need, like fixing her computer or moving a box she could have easily carried herself. She tagged him online in places she knew I would see, and she never once tried to hide it from me. Instead, she mentioned him in conversation, dropped his name casually, like seasoning in a dish she was daring me to taste. Rowan brushed it off. "She's just being friendly," he said. But I knew better. Celeste never played with toys she didn't intend to break. For weeks, I tried to ignore the unease. I told myself I wouldn't be the jealous sister, the insecure girlfriend. I told myself Rowan loved me, and that was enough. But deep down, a familiar ache returned, the same ache I had felt all through childhood, when Celeste reached for what was mine, and my parents told me to share. The night everything shattered, I hadn't planned to catch them. I only wanted to surprise Rowan with dinner. I stopped at his favorite Thai place and picked up the dish he always teased me for forgetting. Traffic was light. I arrived earlier than usual. His building was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels heavy. His door was pulled nearly shut but not locked. I knocked once, twice. No answer. I told myself to wait. But then I heard it. A laugh. A laugh I knew Celeste's laugh drifting from inside. I pushed the door open. The apartment greeted me with lamplight, soft music, the smell of food already unpacked. And there on the sofa, tangled in each other, were Rowan and Celeste. Her legs tucked under her, his hand resting on her waist. They looked up at me in the same breath. Rowan's face went pale. But Celeste... Celeste smiled. It wasn't the startled smile of someone caught. It was the calm, deliberate smile of someone who had been waiting for me to arrive. She stood, straightened her dress, and tilted her head. There was no shame, only triumph. My voice cracked out the only words I could manage. "How long?" Rowan froze, palms pressed together like a prayer. I said it again, sharper. "How long?" Finally, he whispered, "Since after your birthday." The air rushed out of me. Months. Months of excuses, of canceled plans, of me doubting my own instincts. Every fear I had pushed aside was true. Celeste slid her arm through his and leaned against him as though she was proving a point. She looked at me with that same victorious smirk and said, "You couldn't keep him. So I will." Her words cut deeper than any confession. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, flaunted like a crown on her head. She wanted me to watch as she claimed the one thing I had finally believed was safe. I stumbled out before my knees gave way. The hallway blurred, the elevator closed, and the night air hit me like ice. I drove without direction, without breath, until I ended up at the only place I thought might catch me, my parents' house. I told my mother. Everything. I wanted anger. I wanted her to hold me, to rage with me, to tell me Celeste had crossed a line no sister should ever cross. But she only sighed, pressed her hand to her chest, and said, "Maybe they found something real. Maybe you should let it be." Her words didn't fall like comfort. They fell like stones. My father shook his head and said Rowan must not have been the right one. He said Celeste always had a way of connecting with people, as if her cruelty was a gift, not a crime. Not once did they say, "We are furious for you." Not once did they choose me. That night I lay in the same bed I had grown up in, staring at glow-in-the-dark stars that no longer glowed. I remembered wishing on them as a child, begging for my parents to see me. Now I understood they never would, because when I told them Celeste smiled as she took what was mine, they looked away. They told me not to cause trouble, not to make a scene, not to break the family apart. They asked me to swallow my pain. The way I always had, And in that silence, I realized something. I hadn't only lost Rowan. I had lost the last fragile hope that my parents would ever defend me. The betrayal wore two faces, my sister's smirk and my parents' silence. And in one night, I became completely unchosen. They say heartbreak feels like fire, but for me, it was more like drowning. The weeks after Rowan's betrayal blurred together into something heavy and airless. I woke up each day with the same ache pressing against my chest, a silence so loud it hurt my ears. I went to work. I designed logos, answered emails. But inside, I was gone. I felt like I was walking through a world made of glass brittle and ready to shatter at the slightest touch. At night it was worse. My bed was cold. The shadows of my room seemed to breathe, and my thoughts circled endlessly around the image of Rowan's hand on Celeste's back. The sound of her laugh echoing in my head like a cruel reminder that everything I had built could be taken just like that. And what cut deepest wasn't only losing him, it was losing the safety of family. Because when I turned to my parents, desperate for comfort, I heard words I can never forget. Maybe Rowan just loves Celeste more. Maybe this is how it was meant to be. I remember standing in our kitchen staring at my mother's face as she said those words. The linoleum floor under my feet felt like it was tilting. I wanted to scream, to demand how she could say that. But my voice refused to leave my throat. I realized then that I was utterly alone, not just abandoned by the man I loved, but betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me. That night I lay in bed and whispered to myself, "You are invisible, you always have been." And for a long time I believed it. The days bled into months. I stopped painting, stopped cooking, stopped answering messages from friends. My body was alive, but my spirit was stuck at the bottom of a well, staring up at a circle of sky I couldn't reach. Sometimes I wondered if I would ever climb out, or if maybe this was it. A life spent in shadow watching other people take the pieces that should have been mine. And then Kai appeared. I had seen him around before he lived in the same building a floor below mine. He wasn't the kind of man who filled a room with noise. He was quiet, steady, with eyes that looked like they had seen storms and chosen not to speak of them. The first time he knocked on my door, it was because a package had been delivered to his apartment by mistake. I opened the door in sweatpants, hair unwashed, eyes swollen from crying. I remember mumbling thanks, trying to close the door quickly before he could really look at me. But he didn't look away. He didn't ask questions either. He just said softly, "Rough day." And for some reason I nodded. Kai didn't push me. He didn't demand that I smile or move on or be strong. Instead, he began to show up in small ways. One evening he asked if I wanted to join him for a walk. The air was cool leaves scattering across the sidewalk, and we barely spoke. But that silence was different. It wasn't sharp or heavy. It was gentle, like he was saying, "You don't need to perform here." Other nights he brought food. Homemade soup bread, still warm little containers that smelled of rosemary and garlic. I remember staring at the steam rising from the bowl and realizing it was the first real meal I'd had in weeks. He never said, "You need to eat." He just set it down in front of me and stayed while I picked at it, as if waiting with me mattered more than the food itself. Slowly, almost without realizing it, I began to breathe again. Not deeply, not freely, but enough. Enough to walk a little farther, enough to laugh quietly at one of his dry jokes, enough to sketch again late at night with a pencil that had been gathering dust, and somewhere inside me, a fragile seed began to stir. Not the wild, breathless love I had with Rowan. No, this was different. It wasn't fireworks. It was a steady flame. One that promised not to burn me down, but to keep me warm. I think I fell in love with Kai the day he found me crying on the stairs. It had been one of those long afternoons when memories clawed their way back, and I couldn't stop shaking. He didn't ask me to explain. He just sat beside me, his shoulder, close enough that I could lean if I wanted to. And I did. For the first time in months. I let myself lean. He whispered, "You don't have to carry it alone." And I believed him. When Kai proposed, it wasn't with a grand gesture. It was a Sunday morning sunlight spilling through the blinds, the smell of coffee in the air. He simply held out a small silver ring and said, "You deserve to be chosen." I cried so hard I couldn't even say yes at first. I just nodded into his chest, holding on as if I'd finally been pulled out of that well. Our wedding was small, quiet, warm. There were candles, a few close friends, and laughter that didn't feel forced. But there was no family. My parents refused to come. They said it would be too awkward with Celeste. In that moment, their absence stung like salt, pressed into an old wound. But as I looked at Kai standing steady beside me, I realized family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the ones who stay when everyone else walks away. That night when the last guest had left, and it was just us in our small apartment, I sat with my head on his shoulder. I felt joy, real joy, but also a faint ache. Because even though I had begun a new chapter, even though I had found a love built on steadiness and care, the scars of the past were still there. I whispered to him, "I finally have a family of my own, but the old wounds, they never really healed." He kissed the top of my head and said, "Scars don't mean broken. They mean you survived." And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe survival could also mean happiness. They say time heals all wounds, but I don't believe that anymore. Some wounds only scar over fragile and thin until one phone call is enough to tear them wide open again. I thought I had closed that chapter. I thought I had cut my parents out for good. For years I built my own peace, my own family with Kai, who loved me not for what I gave up, but for who I was. I told myself I didn't need them. I told myself I was finally free. But then the phone rang. It was late in the afternoon, golden light spilling through the kitchen window. I saw the caller ID, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mother's name. Her voice when I answered was trembling, broken, in a way I hadn't heard since I was a child. "Aubrey," she whispered, "please, please come home. We miss you. We're sorry. We just want our family back together." I froze. Every instinct in me screamed to hang up. But my body wouldn't move. Because even after all these years, a part of me still longed to hear her say those words. I had imagined them so many times in my dreams. My parents finally admitting they were wrong. Finally choosing me. But reality is never as simple. I asked her why now. She said holidays didn't feel the same without me. She said she had been thinking about mistakes. That she wished she could take back the things she said when Rowan and Celeste betrayed me. Her words sounded like water over stone soft, but unable to erase the cracks. I wanted to believe her. Oh God, I wanted to. But my chest ached with suspicion. Was this genuine remorse? Or was it just guilt surfacing years too late? My heart whispered yes. My mind screamed no. That night, I sat at the table with Kai, turning the phone over and over in my hands. My voice shook as I told him about the call. His eyes darkened, not with anger at me, but with a fierce protectiveness. "If you go," he said, "I go with you. I won't let them hurt you again." I had never felt safer. I had never felt more seen. But still, My chest was a battlefield. Part of me wanted to slam the door forever. Another part wanted to prove that I wasn't the weak, invisible girl they once dismissed. For days I wrestled with myself. At night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the echoes of my childhood, the forgotten fevers, the broken promises, the way they looked at Celeste with pride while I stood in the shadows, and later, the way they excused her betrayal, telling me maybe Rowan loved her more. How do you forgive that? How do you ever trust those hands not to push you aside again? But then I thought of something else. I thought of the way Kai looked at me, the way he stood beside me at our wedding when my parents' chairs were empty, the way he reminded me with every gesture that I was worth standing up for. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't about them anymore. This was about me. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. But I could walk into that room, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman I had become. And if I did that, then maybe the ghosts would lose their power over me. So I picked up the phone again. My mother answered, her voice thick with tears. I told her I would come, but not alone. I told her my husband would be with me and that if she couldn't accept that, then there was no reunion to be had. She agreed quickly, almost too quickly. Her relief poured through the line like a flood. But I didn't let myself drown in it, not this time. The night before the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror staring at my reflection. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Stronger, sharper, carrying scars, yes, but also carrying a strength I never thought I'd have. I touched the small necklace Kai had given me, a simple silver pendant. It grounded me. It reminded me that whatever happened, I had already built my own family. I wasn't walking into that house desperate for love. I was walking in to show them I had survived without it. Kai squeezed my hand as we prepared to leave. Remember, he whispered, you owe them nothing. You go for you, not for them. I nodded, and for the first time I believed it. So here I am, on the edge of a dinner table reunion I never asked for. A reunion that feels more like a test. Part of me is terrified. Part of me still aches like the child I once was. But another part, the stronger part, knows this is no longer about begging for their acceptance. This is about facing the ghosts and proving to myself that they no longer have the power to define me. Tomorrow, I will walk into that house, not as the daughter who was forgotten, not as the sister who was betrayed, but as a woman who has already rebuilt her life. And whatever I find there, I know one thing for certain. The girl who once cried herself to sleep waiting for her parents to notice her. She will not be walking through that door. That night, I walked back into the house I once called home. The wooden steps creaked under my feet, as if they remembered every time I had run up them as a child. But now, instead of warmth, there was only a weight pressing against my chest. The porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the doorway, and for a moment, I almost turned back. But Kai's hand pressed gently at the small of my back, steady and silent, reminding me that I wasn't walking in alone. When the door opened, the smell of roasted meat and old perfume hit me all at once. The voices inside softened for a second, like the hush that falls in a church when someone unexpected enters. I stepped across the threshold and every pair of eyes turned. Cousins, aunts, uncles' faces I hadn't seen in years. Some looked surprised, some looked cold, and others just stared as if I were a ghost who had wandered back where I didn't belong. I tried to breathe evenly, but my heart was slamming against my ribs. Every step into that living room felt heavier than the last. I saw the walls lined with family photos, the same photos that once framed my absence more than my presence. And in the middle of it all, At the far end of the table sat my parents. My mother's eyes welled with tears the moment she saw me. My father forced a smile too wide, too brittle, like plaster over cracks. "Welcome home, Aubrey," he said, but it didn't sound like home anymore. And then she arrived. Celeste. My sister walked in as if she were stepping onto a stage, her hair shining under the chandelier, her dress cut to perfection. And beside her, Rowan, the man who once held my future in his hands, now holding hers. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might collapse. Celeste's lips curved into a smile the moment our eyes met, not a smile of kindness, but of triumph. It said without words, "Look what I have that used to be yours." I sat down at the long dining table, Kai beside me. The silverware glinted under the warm lights, and every sound, every clink of a glass, every scrape of a chair seemed too loud, too sharp. Conversations resumed in fragments. But the air was heavy with the unspoken. I kept my gaze on the plate in front of me, afraid that if I looked up for too long, I would shatter. And then it happened. Halfway through the meal, Celeste stood with her wineglass raised. Her voice rang clear, sweetened with false affection. "I just want to thank everyone for coming together tonight. And I especially want to thank my sister Aubrey for being brave enough to join us despite, well, everything." The room went still. A laugh delicate but cruel slid off her tongue as she continued. It takes real courage to face the past, especially when the past didn't exactly turn out in her favor. Her words sliced through me sharper than any knife on the table. I could feel my face burn every eye in the room, pressing into me, waiting to see if I would break. Celeste swirled her glass, her diamonds catching the light as if even the stones were mocking me. "And let's be honest," she added softly though, loud enough for all to hear, "not everyone can be lucky in love. But I suppose, in the end, everything finds its rightful place." Then she leaned closer to Rowan, brushing her hand against his arm as though staking a claim. Her smile widened, almost daring me to respond. Inside, I was crumbling. Every word was a dagger reopening old wounds that had never fully closed. I wanted to scream, to throw the glass in front of me, to demand why it was never enough to simply be me. But my throat locked. I sat frozen, my nails digging into my palm under the table. And then I felt it. Kai's hand, warm, steady wrapping around mine. His thumb traced slow circles against my skin, grounding me in the storm. I turned slightly, just enough to see his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message was clear. "You don't have to fight this battle alone. I'm here." So I swallowed the fire in my chest. I forced my lips into the smallest, calmest smile I could manage. And I said nothing. The silence was my answer. Because sometimes, refusing to give someone the satisfaction of your pain is the only power you have left. But make no mistake, in that moment, under the glow of the chandelier, with my family watching and my sister smirking like a queen on her throne, I felt humiliated all over again. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a performance. And I was cast as the loser in a play I had never agreed to join. That night I realized Celeste hadn't just taken Rowan. She wanted my dignity too. She wanted the world and me to know she had won. But as I sat there, Kai's hand wrapped around mine, I made a vow inside my chest. She could strip me of their approval. She could flaunt the man who once promised me forever. But she would not take the last piece of me that still remained, because I was not the same girl who used to beg for love at that table. I was a woman now. And though I walked out of that house in silence, my silence was not surrender. It was the beginning of something else, something she would never see coming. And the next day, Everything began to shift. The room felt like it was shrinking around me. I could still taste the sharp sweetness of wine and humiliation. Celeste sat across the table with that polished smile, and Rowan kept his eyes on the plate as if there were answers hidden in the porcelain. I told myself to breathe. I told myself to hold steady. But the air was buzzing a low, angry hum beneath the clatter of forks and the fake small talk. Then Kai let go of my hand. He pushed his chair back slow and deliberate, and stood. The sound was soft, but it cut through every other sound in the room. All the whispers stopped. Even the chandelier seemed to pause its trembling. His voice was calm when he started. Calm but cold in a way I had never heard from him. "Enough," he said. The word fell into the center of the table and rippled outward. No one moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at Celeste, then at Rowan, then at my parents. And he said what no one here had ever dared to say. He said this is not a reunion. This is a performance. He said you did not invite Aubrey to heal you, invited her to lose again. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father's hands clenched around his napkin. Celeste tilted her head and tried to look wounded. Kai didn't flinch. He told them what I had carried alone for years. He said Celeste had been given a crown the day she was born and had never learned how to carry anything but it. He said everyone in this room had fed that crown with their excuses, with their indulgence, with their blindness. He said the man sitting beside her once promised a future to the woman he now refuses to look at. He said Rowan belonged to Aubrey not as property, but as a promise freely given and freely broken. The moment Celeste decided her wanting was more sacred than my pain. Someone at the far end of the table coughed. A chair scraped against wood. No one tried to interrupt him. Maybe it was the way he stood. Maybe it was the truth itself finally given a voice, with edges that cut. Celeste laughed a thin, brittle sound. She said he didn't know our history. She said he was being cruel. She said I was fine, that I had moved on, that this was all so unnecessary. But her eyes flashed a quick flare of anger, and I saw the same triumph from earlier flicker and fail. Kai shook his head. He said moving on does not erase what was done. He said survival is not the same as being spared. He said watching someone rebuild after a fire does not absolve the one who struck the match. Rowan finally looked up. His face was gray. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There it was, the same silence he'd offered me the night I found them on the sofa. The same silence that had carved a hollow through my chest. Even now, with truth hanging in the air, he had nothing to give. Kai turned to my parents. He called them by their names, not mother, not father, and the room seemed to flinch. He said you taught one daughter to be invisible, and the other to be untouchable. You called one dramatic for crying, and the other fragile for taking. You told the strong one to be stronger, and the favored one that strength would always be supplied for her. You call this love. It is not love. It is neglect dressed in devotion. My mother stood so quickly her chair rocked. Her eyes filled with tears. She reached for Celeste as if Kai's words had pushed her child to the edge of a cliff. "Don't upset her," she whispered. "She's sensitive. She's always been sensitive." My father moved closer too, placing himself between Kai's voice and the girl he still saw as breakable. He said this is not the time. He said we should be kind. He said Aubrey was making a scene through her husband. Something inside me steadied. The old script tried to pull me under, be quiet. Be good. Let it pass. But Kai was already standing in the place I had always abandoned. He did not shout. He did not argue. He simply held the ground in front of me and refused to move. Celeste began to cry. Big, careful tears that glimmered beautifully under the light. She pressed her face to our mother's shoulder and said she didn't want to fight, that she only wanted peace, that she was tired of being painted as the villain. Her voice was soft, but the words reached for their old power. They reached for the room's pity, for the well-rehearsed rush to defend the delicate one. No one spoke. Not the aunts who loved a story. Not the cousins who had watched us grow and looked away. Silence spread like frost, and in that quiet, I heard something I had never heard before in this house. I heard the sound of the story breaking. Kai turned back to me. His eyes softened, all the steel melting into warmth. "You do not have to stay," he said. "You do not have to earn anything here. You have nothing to prove." The words reached the deepest part of me, the part that had been waiting at the top of the stairs since I was a child, hoping to be called down, hoping to be seen. My hands were steady when I set my napkin on the table. I stood. The room felt different from that height, as if the ground had decided to lift to meet me for once. My mother called my name. There was panic in it, and guilt, and something like disbelief. I looked at her and saw all the years we had lost between us. I saw the night of the art showcase, the morning I had a fever, the wedding day with empty chairs. I wanted to forgive her right then, to make it easy. But forgiveness is not an eraser. It is a door, and I wasn't ready to walk through it yet. I told her quietly that I would not stay for dessert. I told my father I wished him well. I looked at Rowan and found no words left for him at all. Then I faced Celeste. She had stopped crying. Her eyes were dry, bright, and searching my face for a crack she could widen. I told her that what she took did not define me anymore. I told her that winning by breaking a sister is not a victory, it is a confession. And I told her that whatever crown she thought she wore was heavy for a reason. I reached for Kai's hand. His fingers closed around mine like the final stitch on a wound. We turned toward the hallway. The chandelier hummed back to life. Chairs shifted, but no one tried to stop us. In the foyer, the old mirror waited, the one that had watched me smooth my hair before school. The one that had reflected a girl, practicing smiles that never quite reached her eyes. I saw myself there, now older, steadier, carrying scars that did not ask for permission to exist. I did not look away. We stepped out into the cool night. The door clicked shut behind us, a small sound, but it rang like a bell. I felt something loosen inside my chest, something long and tight and unseen. A cord I had been dragging for years, finally cut. We walked to the car without speaking. At the curb I exhaled, a breath that felt like it had been waiting since childhood. Kai opened my door and leaned close. "You were not alone in there," he said. "You will never be alone in there again." I nodded. I believed him. And as the engine turned over and the house receded in the mirror, I understood that leaving in silence did not mean surrender. It meant I had chosen a different kind of voice, one that would not beg, one that would not break, one that finally belonged to me. That night, after the dinner that felt more like a trial than a reunion, I came home and dropped my purse onto the floor. The silence of our apartment wrapped around me. But it wasn't the kind of silence that comforts. It was heavy. It was buzzing with all the words I had swallowed at that table. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. At first I thought maybe, just maybe it was an apology. But when I finally picked it up, I saw the truth. Messages from my mother. Messages from my father. Not one of them asked if I was all right. Not one of them asked if I made it home safe. Instead, they accused me. They told me I had ruined everything, that I had hurt Celeste with my coldness, that I had humiliated the family. I stared at the screen and felt my chest tighten, the way it always did when I was a child, being scolded for things that weren't my fault. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Her name lit up on the screen. Celeste. My sister. Or maybe I should just call her the thief of my life. Her messages came one after another. Crying emojis. Broken words about how I had attacked her. As if she was the victim. As if I hadn't spent my whole life bending until I nearly snapped just to keep her comfortable. And then, in the middle of her desperate little play, she turned her focus toward Kai. She wrote things like, "I wish I had someone like you to protect me, and you deserve better than being tied to her bitterness." My hands shook as I read it. Not because I doubted Kai, I knew him, but because I realized how far she was willing to go. Even now. Even after taking so much. I remember sitting there in the dark, staring at the glow of my phone, and it hit me like a knife sliding into an old wound. This family was never mine. Not really. I was only ever the placeholder, the sacrifice, the one who was supposed to keep quiet while Celeste was adored, forgiven, excused. Something inside me cracked that night, not the kind of break that makes you weaker, but the kind that finally lets the air in. I picked up the phone and called my mother. She answered quickly, her voice still sharp from the earlier scolding. Before she could speak another word, I cut in. "Mom, you never chose me. Not once. You raised me to believe I was loved. But the truth is, you only ever had room for Celeste. You raised a destroyer and forgave her. Over and over. And you left me to carry the cost." The silence on the line was thick. I thought she might argue. I thought she might deny it. But all I heard was her breath, shallow, indignant. And in that silence, I found my answer. I didn't wait for her to recover. I didn't wait for excuses. I simply whispered, "Goodbye, Mom." And then I hung up. I sat for a moment holding the phone in my lap. My heart was pounding, but there was no fear, only finality. One by one, I blocked them all. My mother, my father, Celeste, even Rowan. The screen went quiet. For the first time, completely quiet. And in that stillness, I breathed. It hurt, yes. There was grief. There was loss. There was the ache of knowing I had no family left to call my own. But there was also relief, like untying ropes that had cut into my skin for years, like stepping out of a cage I had convinced myself was home. Kai found me there sitting in the dark. He didn't ask questions. He just knelt beside me and held my hands. And when he whispered, "You did what you had to do," I finally let my tears fall. That night, I understood something I had never allowed myself to believe. Family is not the people who share your blood. It's the people who choose to stand by you when the rest of the world turns away. And as I leaned into Kai's embrace, I realized that, by cutting ties, I wasn't losing everything. I was finally making room to live. I had stepped out of their shadow and into my own light. And for the first time, I was free. I never thought I would see the day when the lies finally collapsed. But life has a strange way of balancing the scales. One morning, while sipping coffee in our little kitchen, I scrolled through my phone and froze. A headline, a photo, a dozen notifications lighting up my screen. Rowan had left Celeste. He walked out. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone. For years I had imagined what it would feel like to hear something like that. I thought I'd be ecstatic, vindicated, maybe even dancing in the middle of the room. But in that moment, all I felt was quiet. Not joy, not triumph, just silence inside me as if my heart had already moved too far beyond them as to care. Still curiosity tugged at me. I kept reading. Celeste. My sister, the so-called miracle child, was everywhere online. People posting screenshots, old messages, whispering stories that were no longer whispers. Her polished image was crumbling in real time. Videos mocked her fake sweetness. Former colleagues came forward with stories of entitlement. She lost her job within days. Sponsors pulled away. And soon she was nothing but a scandal, a laughingstock. I should have smiled. I should have felt something sharp and sweet in my chest. But instead, I sat there watching her unravel, and I realized how empty it all seemed. I didn't need her downfall to heal me. I had already healed by walking away. Then, as if the past refused to let go, my phone rang. It was my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice cracked with anger, not sorrow. She told me Celeste was broken, fragile, devastated. She told me Rowan was cruel, that everyone online was heartless. And then, as always, she found a way to blame me. She said if I had been kinder, if I had forgiven, if I had not cut ties so harshly, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. For a moment, I sat there stunned. After everything, they still couldn't see me. They still couldn't hold me as their daughter. They only clung to the wreckage of Celeste. I felt my hand tighten around the phone. Then I slowly loosened it. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just let her words fall like rain on a roof, meaningless, fading as soon as they hit. And then I hung up. I blocked the number for the final time. That was the day I truly understood. My family had never really been mine. So Kai and I packed what we had, and we left. A new city, a new start. Not glamorous, not loud, just ours. The apartment we found was small, with creaking floors and sunlight that spilled across the living room in the mornings. But to me, it felt like a palace. For the first time, no ghosts lingered in the corners. No one's shadow stretched over my happiness. I remember the first evening there. Kai cooked pasta. I set the table and we ate while laughing about the crooked picture frame we had tried to hang. After dinner, we opened the windows, and the city sounds drifted in. Not hostile, not suffocating, just alive. It was ordinary, but to me it was extraordinary. Day by day, the peace grew roots inside me. A morning walk, holding Kai's hand. A lazy Sunday curled up with books. A quiet night listening to the hum of the refrigerator while the world outside rushed past. These little things became treasures proof that I had finally stepped out of the storm. Sometimes when I'm sitting by the window, I think back. I picture Celeste, Rowan, my parents. I imagine them still clinging to the ruins, still blaming, still aching for something that was never real. And I realize I don't need to carry their weight anymore. People say blood is the strongest bond, that family is forever. But I have learned something different. Peace is stronger than blood. Choice is stronger than obligation. And love, real love, doesn't destroy, it heals. So here I am. Not with the family I was born into, but with the family I chose. My husband, my partner, my friend, my quiet apartment with its golden light. My mornings that begin with laughter, not tears. They may keep calling me heartless, selfish, ungrateful. But I know the truth. I finally know myself. And if you ask me what I hold on to now, it isn't resentment. It isn't revenge. It isn't even the satisfaction of karma. It's this, the stillness in my chest when I wake up. The gentle rhythm of an ordinary life. The certainty that I am free. They say blood is the unbreakable tie. But I have chosen something better. I have chosen peace.